It can, yeah.
Fantastic. My name's Andrew McLaughlin. I'm the Chief Executive of Yorkshire and Humber Drainage Boards. My team manages 8 flood risk management authorities in Yorkshire, including a number of the larger IDBs around the Humber head levels, which is the area that I'm going to focus on today in my presentation. I'm going to show you some things that I'm just going to show you a number of problems that we have in this area that I think can be resolved. And I think with some sensible policy decisions and by cutting through red tape and using local ratepayers funding in a sensible way, I think we can address a lot of these problems without having to find additional resources. But the first thing I'm going to do is start off with a short video presentation for which I'll remain silent. Then I'll go on to the rest of my presentation. Okay, so that will just give you some idea of the problems we've had over the last 18 months, 2 years in the Humber head levels. Caroline did refer to it earlier on, and I'm grateful for her comments. We did work very closely with the Environment Agency, and we hope we did make a difference. I'm just going to take some definitions. What you see on the right is a tree, and that why is there a tree on the presentation? That will become fairly obvious in a minute. A catchment, that's the act of collecting water. Dendritic, branched form, therefore the tree. Fluvial is relating to river processes. A system is a set of things that work together. Maintenance is the process of keeping something in good condition. And flooding, legal definition, is water above ground level where it wouldn't normally be. Now, in the perfect world, we wouldn't have flooding. With unlimited resources and unlimited space to store the waters. Clearly, we're never going to achieve that. But what we can achieve is the maintenance of a dendritic fluvial system that using the resource we have within a given standard to reduce the risk of flooding. I feel that the problem is we're not doing that with the resources we have, which is resulting in poor catchment management. I hope the tree makes sense now. So with any catchment, we have this branch-like system which eventually ends up in the low-level catchment before it enters estuaries in the sea. And there's 3 necessary and achievable measures that we can take to manage a catchment as a whole. Natural flood risk management, a lot of interest in that recently, not a lot of work's been done in that. Some really good ideas and progress, does require improvement. In the middle catchment, where we have our towns and cities, we've had non-existent historic practices, which means inappropriate development has caused local flooding and driven water down into the lowland catchments faster than it should be. But we've got some really good practices for sustainable drainage. Those need sustaining through continued sensible spatial planning decisions and legislation, such as the enactment of Part 3 of the Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act. But critical, what we're talking about today is channel maintenance and conveyance at the bottom end of the catchment. We have had some very good historic performance, but unfortunately we've had some very poor recent performance, and we need some very significant and urgent improvement in this area. And I'll go on to talk about that and show you some case studies of evidence why this is a problem. So concentrating on the lowland catchments, typically we'll have these high-level carriers, or lowland carriers as they're referred to earlier on, where the banks are actually raised above the ground level in order to get water from the high ground to the low ground in the most efficient way. So typically in these areas we have communities and industry and infrastructure that's below the maximum water level, or often the maximum tidal level in tidal influence zones. We have little or no gradients, and the local land drainage systems rely on free discharge to the river system. Importantly, in these areas we have heavily modified, which is a term used in WFD, And the term not used in the WFD, unfortunately, is entirely engineered rivers. So we have entire river systems that engineers have diverted and improved to sustain the communities in that area. So talking you through some examples, here I've used probably the simplest form of hydraulic calculation. So that's looking at a cross-sectional area of a high-level carrier, where we have 75-metre cross-section. This is a maintained system. So, you know, minimum maintenance comes in once a year to keep the banks clear and keep trees down and debris away from these, what are engineered systems. And you can see, using this example with these figures, we've got a pass forward rate of 197 litres per second. Now, what I'm going to do now is transition to unfortunately, an all too typical scenario of these engineered systems in the Humber Head levels. Typically, and I'm very happy to take anybody out on site and show you lots of examples of these, is these engineered systems have not been maintained effectively, they've become overgrown, we end up with willows that are dragging the banks in, and it's causing a significant restriction to the cross section of the river. And because of the root balls underwater and silt, etc., we have a much higher roughness coefficient, which means the water can't move through that system as the engineers who designed these systems intended it to. Now, if we just take these examples, we can see the same system maintained and unmaintained, and you can see, using just these figures, and this is a made-up example, but it illustrates the issue, that we're looking at up to three quarters reduction in the efficiency of moving water over a 24-hour period, which might represent a typical winter storm. So where does all the water go? Now, I'm just going to click on here, and it's going to go through an animated presentation that I'll talk you through. In the middle of this is some words, and this is what I mean by using the existing resources we have efficiently. And specifically here, I'm referring to local taxpayers, local council taxpayers, and land drainage rate payers precept, which is paid for the maintenance of these channels in RDB areas. So we'll go back to our lowland system, and you see, as the water cannot get down the system, this has happened, it will overspill the banks and flood the lowland areas. Okay, so this is very typically what we see. So we've got locally funded RDB pumping stations pumping the river back into the river. But the craziness of this is local taxpayers and national taxpayers are already paid for maintenance of the river system, and they're having to pay again. So here's our pumps kicking in, locally funded, putting the river back into the river. Okay, and that has happened quite a lot recently. Now, the Yorkshire Humber Drainage Boards, we are an evidence-based organisation, so I don't make these statements lightly. So we've got two case studies we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the River Wen, and you see a map of that in a moment, where it is in the world. This is a main river. Again, it's heavily modified and in places an entirely artificial engineered river. It's a carrier. It's carrying water across the low ground from the high ground. My asset team, my engineers, have carried out a very detailed walkover survey. We've used the Environment Agency condition classification system to understand the states of the main river. They've stopped at 122 points and carried out detailed surveys, and they found that over half of the river to be in the worst condition or the second worst condition of a river system using that classification system. Now, going back to local precepts, so over the last 10 years, local ratepayers have paid, based on an average, around £22 a metre to the Rivers Authority to maintain that river system, but in order that we can discharge to it. But we cannot find in that period any apparent significant channel maintenance occurring, which has caused regular flooding in low order events as well as significant flooding events. So the map on the right here shows you where the River Wen is in the world. It's in the Humber Head levels at the mouth of Humber, goes into the River Don. The map on the left is a map showing the occurrence of poor or very poorly maintained stretches of the river, which is causing blockages and head losses and flow issues in the channel. Why is that important to us as an IDB? I'll put the IDB network on. So we've got a series of pumps and gravity outfalls that simply, if we turn those on, it simply pushes the water around in circles and causes flooding elsewhere. If we don't turn the pumps on, it causes flooding. So these arterial rivers are absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential to maintain these in good condition to allow us to do the job we do. So the second example I'm going to give is the River Don. So the River Don starts up in Sheffield, Rotherham and the high ground there. It is a very good example catchment that's got an upper, a middle and a lower part of the catchment. And what we see here is an historic map from around about World War II, I believe, that shows a section of the River Don between a village that some of you may have heard of called Fish Lake, that suffered some flooding back in 2019. It then goes north. Again, a chap called Cornelius van Muyden engineered this back in the 17th century, away from the River Trent. So it's an entirely engineered system that then ends up at the town of Goole. So what I'm going to do now is just click on this, and there'll be a short video that will zoom in on an area of interest and compare the maintenance regime then to where we are now based on aerial photography. So if you just bear with me. So as we transition, you'll see the reduction in the river channel there from the condition 70 years ago. Now, I'd like to, we could assume that's mudflats, etc., but unfortunately, grass and mature trees don't tend to grow on mudflats. So that is the channel now. For those of you who missed it, that's what we're looking at. I mean, I'm not going to put a percentage on loss of channel, but it's clear to see. So actions needed. Urgent action to restore main river channels to design profiles. Enabling policies. Let's cut red tape and take a common sense approach to channel maintenance. Please stop counting houses when making spending decisions. We see why this drives the wrong behaviours in flood risk managers for capital works. But there's some logic behind that. It certainly drives the wrong behaviours in flood risk managers when thinking about whole catchment management. We need to move away from counting properties when making those decisions. We need robust time-bound targets for channel maintenance. Again, same theme. We had 2 main rivers handed over to our boards 5 or 6 years ago through a letter. If it can be done then, I'm pretty sure it can be done now. Let's speed up the demainment process. Reducing precepts, of course, we can't do this for nothing, but local IDBs can operate more minor river systems a lot more efficiently at a local level. Let's improve reciprocity. We are working very well with our local EA ops teams. We're doing a lot of main river work at the moment. We're doing it very cost effectively and doing it very professionally. It is an effective and legal procurement route. Let's do lots more of it. So, Robert, to conclude, we need effective management. We believe this can be achieved within existing budgets if local taxation is spent in a sensible way. There's a lot of catching up to do to bring systems back into a serviceable condition. Need to recognise that the lower catchment is benefiting the whole catchment. We can't continue putting water down into communities in the lower catchment without putting measures in place. And there's 3 necessary and achievable measures for total catchment management. One is natural flood risk management. Let's carry on with that and improve that. Let's keep SUDS going. SUDS is making a real difference. Let's get the regulation and strategic decision making firmly embedded going forward on that. But most importantly and most urgently, we do need channel maintenance and conveyance improving in the lower catchment to prevent flooding of those communities where those works are benefiting the whole catchment. That concludes my presentation, Robert.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That's brilliant. And we'll go straight on. Please capture any questions that you have in the chat. But we're going to move straight on to Daniel Johns, Head of Public Affairs for Anglian Water. Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Just sharing my slides, hopefully on the screen. Great. Well, thanks so much, first of all, for the invitation to speak today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all this morning. Yeah, my name's Daniel Johns. I work for Anglian Water. I've been here for about 2.5, almost 3 years now. But I've got a background in flood risk management going back to 2008 and the launch of the PIT review. So I was one of the architects of the Flood and Water Management Act. It was my team that introduced partnership funding in 2011 and negotiated the agreement with the flood insurance, with the insurance industry in 2013 to build towards flood re. Since then, I've worked with the Committee on Climate Change on the kind of second climate change risk assessment. Obviously, the third came out last week. And Anglian Water, it's my team that looks after flood risk management and drainage as part of a kind of integrated water management approach to water company involvement in new development and so forth. So I'm kind of delighted to take part this morning, and in particular to mention a couple of case studies, in particular in response to the winter flooding that we experienced across the east of England in December and January into February. So really we had unprecedented levels of rainfall. We've not seen rainfall totals like this on more than 100 years of instrumental records. Groundwater levels across the east of England were already very high following a very wet autumn, and then we had the wettest December and January that we've seen on that record, 250% of average rainfall levels. And that meant, as a water company looking after sewage assets, tens of thousands of kilometres of sewage assets across the region, we had more than 4 billion litres of water going through our network every single day. That's 4 billion more litres than normal. A normal kind of dry flow might be about 1 billion litres per day. So we had almost 5 times that amount of water going through our network, which is just not designed to take. There's lots of reasons for that. Caroline mentioned climate change, and absolutely the Met Office has now detected a climate change signal in rainfall patterns against the kind of noise of year-to-year natural variation. And we know that severe weather events are going to get worse. Winter rainfall will get worse. Summer rain may decline, but when the rain does fall, it's going to arrive in those heavier bursts. So we had to have double the number of tankers that we would normally have out on the road, 120 around the region. We had to obviously place those strategically, prioritise customers who have lost services, potentially suffering from both internal flooding and external flooding of their properties. And we had unprecedented call volumes, 30,000 jobs raised. So that's 30,000 customers who've had to get on the phone because of some issue to do with their sewage systems, flooding in the local area, and obviously concerns about what might be happening on their streets. And one of the issues we had really was that the water going into our network was clearly not, well, you can say it's not our water that would need to be dealt with by a water company. This was surface water getting into our sewers because of culverts not being maintained, backing up, riparian rivers and drainage channels and so forth in riparian ownership not being maintained, blocking up, spilling onto roads, getting into sewers, and in some cases riverbanks bursting, overtopping, river water getting into sewers. And we had to, in some cases, agree what we call local enforcement positions with the Environment Agency, whereby we have to pump from sewers into watercourses just to bypass the system, again, to avoid the system backing up and flooding people's properties. That's not something we do, we'd like to do. It's all subject to permits, river water quality testing to make sure that there's no environmental harm. But that's a sign of the system not working as it should. There's lots of concern at the moment about storm overflows from water company assets spilling into rivers at times of heavy rainfall. And we're talking about the same problem here. Too much river water, too much surface water, too much groundwater getting into the sewage system, causing flooding, but also causing storm overflows. And part of the problem has just been mentioned is about the lack of regulation there is in favour of sustainable urban drainage systems in new development as well as retrofit to help take surface water out of the system so that the sewers that were built primarily for foul water flows can manage the job that they were built to do. Over pumping, it means that you can see on the pictures on the right hand side, relies on there being somewhere to pump that water to. And that was part of the problem, as I say, culverts not being maintained, there not being space within the rivers to over pump into. And that did limit our ability to kind of drain down the sewers, to make them operate effectively and to protect our customers over the winter. And the winter events has triggered a number of different reviews taking place across the region. This is probably the most significant. The Norfolk Strategic Flooding Alliance has been led by Lord Richard Dannett, who was Chief of General Staff back in the 2000s, you will probably have known from. But that was in response to a feeling locally, and certainly by Lord Dannett, that the approach to responding to these kinds of severe and widespread flood events was incoherent, was the term that was used. And this is kind of 10 years on from the Flood Water Management Act that was supposed to sort out these different responsibilities. And I think that's still a job that's not yet been done. And I think it's also a job where, under the Act, the Environment Agency should have a strategic overview of all sources of flood risk. And I think that duty is still yet to be fulfilled. The location on the right-hand side is a 12-kilometre chalk stream, so it's not a huge part of the country, but it's taking an enormous amount of effort across different partnerships through the councils, so the IDBs, so the water company and the Environment Agency, to try and sort out the dozens of individual problems that are causing the flooding in that part of the region. But one of the core problems here is a lack of maintenance and in-channel structures blocking flows downstream, so that water companies have nowhere to pump, and those rivers are bursting their banks. And the reason why there is a lack of maintenance is partly about just people not understanding the maintenance responsibilities they have, a lack of resources within councils to have the staff that they need to be able to maintain those assets that are in their ownership. And when it comes to the Environment Agency scoring of maintenance activity, because there are a few households, there's very little there at risk. It doesn't score well against their maintenance budgets, and therefore the money goes elsewhere in the country. But there are some things happening at a broader scale alongside the Norfolk Flooding Alliance that's really, I think, starting to take shape and to make real impact. And Water Resources East has already been mentioned under the leadership of Henry Cater as chair. That it's really coming into its own now. Water Resources East was set up by Anglian Water about 8 years ago, but is now an independent company with an independent managing director and board. The CLA, ADA and many individual IDBs are members of Water Resources East. And what's really important now is that they're getting to the stage of individual projects, looking at what they can do in a place-based way to solve some of the both water resources challenges that there are within the east of England, but also making sure that captures the flood risk management benefits that can be achieved by thinking about both water and flooding together. Within the 7-point plan that the Water Resources East has set for itself, there is a clear recognition that flood risk management benefits can be achieved by thinking about water resources in that more holistic way. And as I say, Water Resources East feels like it's really coming into its own. And that link between land management, which we've talked about, the Environmental Land Management Scheme coming through, together with water resources management by water companies and flood risk management by the Environment Agency and other partners, we can really make a difference by working collectively together. And a great example of that is the Future Fens Integrated Adaptation Strategy, which we're now working on in earnest between the partners that you can see there on the bottom right. Again, the same partners, Water Resources East, Anglian Water, ADA, the Environment Agency, supported by Royal Haskoning, to think about how we can manage the challenges of climate change for a very low-lying part of the region, east of England. We've already mentioned food production. It's a massively productive part of the country when it comes to food, to cereals, to horticulture. And because of climate change, we're going to have sea level rise potentially of more than 1 metre in this part of the country. So a 1 in 100 year tidal surge could be a 1 in 1 tidal surge, an every year occurrence by 2100. And it's only by looking at these problems more holistically can you start to imagine how we can adapt our way through those challenges. We know as a water company we need to build 2 major strategic new reservoirs to supply not just the public water supply, but for agriculture, for energy, for industry, for irrigation, which is going to be an increasing demand on the system. So 2 major new reservoirs, which ordinarily as a water company we would just go ahead and try to build ourselves. But by working with partners, working with the Environment Agency from a flood risk management perspective, we think those strategic reservoirs can play a part of an integrated kind of water management system for the Fens that can deliver benefits both for water and flood risk management and biodiversity and nature. And in doing so can unlock economic regeneration opportunities for really quite a socially deprived and socially isolated part of England. At the moment, the dualling of the A47 road and the Cambridge to Wisbech rail link are both kind of on hold because of the levels of flood risk, and individually don't stack up because it would cost too much to protect those new assets against the levels of flood risk. But if you tackle flood risk and water resources strategically, you massively improve the business case for individual infrastructure investments that are much needed to solve some of the social problems in that region. So we think at Anglian Water that's the way forward. Working in partnership on flood risk management, thinking about surface water no longer as the poor relation, but as part of that all sources of flood risk conversation. We think water resources and flood risk management has to be handled hand in hand as part of the climate change adaptation challenge. And certainly in Anglian Water, we would like to see water companies absolutely integral to flood risk management plans and strategies taken forward, not just in the east of England, but across the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. That's absolutely great. And we're going to move straight on to Ian Sturdy from the Somerset Boards Consortium. Ian is the Director of Operations. Ian, if you can start your presentation, please.
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you for inviting me to present today. I've been asked to really present Somerset's experience of keeping our rivers flowing, which is what I'll be doing this morning. My name's Ian Sturdy. I am the Director of Operations at the Somerset Drainage Boards Consortium, where I've worked since 2007. Prior to that, for the whole of my working life, back to 1983, I have worked for the Environment Agency and its predecessor organisations. So here we go with Somerset's experience. We experienced very bad flooding in the summer of 2012 and the winter of 2013-14. Pleased to say that we have achieved many improvements in flood risk in Somerset since then, made possible through much needed additional extra financial support and also cooperation between partners. So the sorts of things which we were able to do was through the provision of an initial £10 million direct from central government, outside of all the normal rules and regulations, that allowed the Environment Agency in Somerset to get on with some immediate obvious tasks, which included overdue dredging of some of our main rivers. The subsequent formation of the Somerset Rivers Authority, which is a very interesting and helpful development in Somerset and may act as a model for other parts of the country. That's been a very successful partnering of public bodies and enabled us to do risk improvements across the county. But that is work which is funded primarily through local taxation and other new sources of funding, and we've also tapped into local enterprise partnership funding as well. However, and this is the important thing really, this work was reactive. It was after the event, and it was after many years where it had been argued by the EA and predecessors that the work would not deliver worthwhile benefits. We know that much remains to be done to restore and then maintain the conveyance of Somerset's other main rivers. But in the absence of any recent critical imperatives, i.e. major flooding, we must ensure that the future work does not become over-regulated, underfunded and perfunctory, and by that I mean sort of the computer says no approach to things. Just very briefly, similar to Andrew's description, conveyance and storage in the levels of moors is very important. Flow which exceeds the conveyance capacity of the embanked main rivers overtops into the lowland systems, and it causes flooding. These are not natural floodplains. As the rivers go down, the water doesn't disappear, it is stored until the river levels subside, and it then has to be drained or pumped back into high-level carriers at additional cost and time. So better conveyance delays the onset and the duration of exceedance conditions in the embanked main rivers, and it hastens the return to lower river levels. So it allows evacuation of floodwater from the lowland systems to start sooner. And this reduces the extent, the depth, the duration, frequency of flooding, as you would expect. And just for context, you know, we talk about, well, you know, there's only a couple of cubic meters per second kept in some of these smaller watercourses possibly, but that is 86,000, you know, for 1 cubic meter per second, running for a day is 86,000 cubic meters of floodwater avoided. So the summer test experience started in summer 2012, the recent Somerset experience, and that really was heavy summer rainfall event that exceeded the channel capacity, and that led to widespread long duration flooding in the summer, warm conditions leading to rotting vegetation, loss of crops, and agricultural damages were assessed at being in the region of £2 million. Widespread environmental damage was also experienced within the designated sites, and as a direct result of reduced conveyance was our contention. So there was some work done within the partnerships to explore that, and as you can see here, here's a cross-section of the River Parrett in summer 2012. The red line shows the designed cross-section, and the blue line shows the cross-section at the time of the 2012 floods. And the other watercourse involved was River Tone, and here we see a series of cross-sections showing change over time, where we can see reduction in cross-section. The red here is the designed cross-section, so you can see, again, very similar to Andrew's discussion earlier on, a significant loss of cross-section area, and therefore conveyance. And in the modelling using this information, again done in partnership with the agency, this shows how improving and increasing or restoring the conveyance capacity of those watercourses would have reduced the impact of flooding. So in this event, you can see the red line here shows the condition, the flood that occurred with the watercourses in their previous condition. The green line here shows what would have happened were the River Tone to have been had its conveyance restored through dredging. So lower peak, later onset, and reduced duration of flooding. And in fact, the blue line here then shows if both of these watercourses in the catchment had their designed conveyance in place, we would really had a very short period of elevated water levels and normal conditions established very, very quickly. And this rapid up and down here, you can see here, I'm sure you understand, is the operation of the pumping station, dealing with what water would have come in, limited water would have come into the system. So that led us to the hardening of the debate around reduced conveyance, increasing flood risk from main river. However, the EA's position at the time, working within the policies and the processes that they have, was that there would be insufficient benefit to justify any work. The environmental sensitivities were high, and the regulations, regulatory activities would probably not allow restoration of the channel. There was high priority work for them to do, so they're obviously focusing on the targets at the time for higher flood risk areas, and it was very difficult. However, we did achieve a limited concession in that it would be possible to remove some of the very worst localised pinch points through savings in revenue funding. So essentially not doing other work, but doing this instead. However, before too much progress was made with that, we were followed up by the winter floods of 2013-14. And there's lots of facts and stats here. I'll summarise very quickly. Wettest winter for a very long time. Incident room open for 4 months. Severe flood warnings issued across the levels of moors. 165 properties with internal flooding. And what I must say to you is, in these sorts of areas, this is not up and down flooding, you know, which is bad enough. This is flooding which remained in properties for up to 3 months, and is very different from what perhaps we see in more natural areas. Communities cut off, A roads closed, railway lines flooded, major incident declared with the gold and silver commands. Many millions of cubic meters of water stored, highest ever recorded levels, over 100 permanent and temporary pumps available, pumping water, and then the Parsons Brinkerhoff economic assessment of the event totaled up the damages of this one single event of 118 million pounds. And just in terms of the location, here we have the catchment map. This is the River Parrett catchment here. Here's another catchment here, which we'll just briefly touch on in a moment. But you know, for an area where basically the computer said no, and it wasn't worth doing this maintenance work to restore conveyance, we had 10,400 hectares of land underwater for many, many months and weeks. That actually led to quite a change with national profile. You will all have seen it on the television. And here we have Owen Paterson, the minister at the time, speaking to our local MP, and here we have some of the people of the affected area pleading the minister for the river to be dredged and to restore the conveyance. And indeed that did lead to success. The money, the £10 million I referred to earlier, was made available, and dredging of the Rivers Parrett and Tone was undertaken successfully by the Environment Agency. Many cubic metres of silt removed over quite a period of time using traditional methods. It was difficult, it was expensive, but it was successful and delivered improved channel capacity and substantially reduced flood risk. And in fact, subsequent analysis has shown that as a result of the restoration of the conveyance that was undertaken, and then that combined with the additional flow and the increased ability to pump, in an equivalent flood event, none of the houses in Moorland would have flooded. So the question has to be asked, why did this work only happen after the event? So following on from that success, there was less appetite post dredging to do further work. The EA actually withdrew from maintenance of the newly dredged channel, and they very much now act as a regulator on these sorts of projects rather than a deliverer. No national funding coming forwards for further works from the traditional sources. Future works, though, is financed locally through the newly formed Somerset Rivers Authority that I referred to earlier on. And that is an interesting and helpful model which might well be explored further. So in the absence of any other operating authority looking at the maintenance aspects, the IDB did step in as a delivery body under a PSCA, Public Sector Cooperation, for maintenance, and delivered the maintenance of that section and delivered the next sections of new conveyance work on the Rivers Parrett and Tone. However, we have been unsuccessful in promoting conveyance work on other main rivers in the area. And I think our view is that that's possibly because there is a return to business as usual, and the fears that I expressed, the three fears I expressed in the previous slide. I'll just return to this slide here, which showed the Parrett catchment here. And I refer to this other area here, which is the Axborough, which is one of our other main river catchments in Somerset. In the 13-14 event, there was far less flooding in the Axborough catchment. But that was as a result of very different rainfall patterns in the catchment rather than any greater ability of that catchment to handle flood flows and conveyance. So we ask ourselves whether the River Brue main river is another catastrophe waiting to happen, and just some examples really here. Here are some cross sections showing the survey which has been provided to us from the agency, where we have silt accumulations occupying quite large proportions of the channel. So we have silt causing loss of cross section. We have lack of vegetation management causing increased channel roughness. And this is a true reflection of the lower reaches of the River Brue. There's very little appetite from the Environment Agency to do very much to improve things here, with the old argument around insufficient benefits to justify the works. And to be fair to local colleagues, that is working within existing policy and process. Very heavy bias on environmental concern about the impacts of reducing roughness by dealing with these sorts of vegetation problems. But there is quite an interesting point here that, of course, again was made earlier on, I believe. If you fail to maintain your critical channels, you do have changes in channel occurring. And what we have here is some really quite sensitive habitat which has now occurred as a result of years of reduced maintenance, and that therefore becomes a problem to be addressed when promoting improvement works. But we see this on the River Brue as very much as a similar attitude to that which existed in the Parrot pre the 2012-13-14 flooding. The question then, what are the benefits of doing these sorts of things? And that we could spend a lot of time sat round debating and arguing about these things, as we did in the Parrot catchment, and as these gentlemen probably are doing here. But if we spend too long doing these things, we will get caught out again, and we will end up probably having an awful lot of work to do in a reactive state after the event. So I'll finish there, just with the rhetorical question, and I don't expect there to be an answer immediately to it, but it's to stimulate discussion, and I think it's replicated across the country, to be honest. Do we have to wait, or will we have to wait for major flood events in the Brue and similar catchments to stimulate proper partnering and action to restore and maintain conveyance main in IDB areas? So I'll end my presentation there, Robert. Thank you. Hopefully I've stuck to time and fitted in as much as possible.
Thank you, Ian. That's great. And we'll move straight on to Andy McGill from the Water Management Consortium. Andy, if you can share your presentation, please.
2 seconds. Sorry about that. Apologies for this. We seem to have a slight technical hitch. Right, are we there? Chairman, can you see the presentation? Yes?
Yep.
Right. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to present to you. As the Chairman said, I'm the Chief Executive of the Water Management Consortium. It covers 4 drainage boards, and they start off up in the Doncaster area, the east of Doncaster East Internal Drainage Board, moving across the Isle of Axholme, down through Retford and Laneham and into Trent Valley Drainage Board, all the way down the west or the east of Nottingham, round to the underbelly of it at Ratcliffe and Sword Power Station, and down into Eastleigh. But today we're going to be looking at the 4th board in the consortium, and this is Lindsay Marsh Drainage Board, and that's right out on the east coast of Lincolnshire. You'll see there all the watercourses, just under 1,000 kilometres of watercourses in the board that are maintained every year by a workforce of 13 people. And the specific area we're looking at today is right down the bottom where Skegness is located in Gibraltar Point. And if we move across to the enhanced map on the left-hand side, you'll see here the area. This is the map. You should, if you can see my cursor moving down here, this is the main river called the River Steeping. You can see how straight it is. It's an artificially enhanced channel, and it comes all the way down here where it's slightly more natural in its shape. Either that or it's been designed by someone that should really be working for the National Rally Championships with the left hand and 90-degree bends in it, and then eventually goes out at Burrough Sluice to the sea. There's another aspect to it here, though. This is a relief channel that flows around the northern part of the town, and this town here is called Wainfleet. And this area here is where the incident took place that saw the national incident being declared. So what happened? Here we are. 2.5 times of the monthly rainfall fell in 3 days across the entire catchment. The lowland board systems were creaking at the seams, and the Highland Carrier was full to the top, as you can see here. We'd had some localised overtopping, and then eventually the bank gave way. And you've got the idea as to the picture down the bottom right was taken a few days after the actual incident. So that's what happened. But what was the real impact? Well, there you go. Hundreds of homes evacuated in a very small town. And where do you put people? How do you care for people when that occurs? 75 internally, thousands of acres of agricultural land underwater, and income lost to very important local industry. And the psychological impact after the initial shock began to grow and is still to this day evident in the local population if you go down during a heavy rainstorm and walk around the village. Obviously, the impact of insurance claims have had a significant effect. And what cost? You know, about millions of pounds, maybe £4 or £5 million in an initial response to recover from this. And that takes care of the physical aspects, but what cost are the psychological impacts of this incident? The weaknesses in the banks in the relief channel were known, and the agency tried the best to get a grant and aid system off the ground. The drainage board tried to get a desilting programme to try and increase the flows down the main channel sorted out. Both fell foul of the current grant and aid schemes, and despite considerable effort by the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, the rug got pulled from under them. But we're not really here to discuss that aspect of it today. What we're going to look at for the next 8 minutes or so is to focus on what happened next. Lincolnshire's fortunate. It has a very strong Lincolnshire Flood Risk and Water Management Partnership. And within that group, there's a considerable cohesion across all the emergency services and everyone involved in water level management. So a quick decision was taken to set up a catchment steering group. And from that, 3 committees fell out. Catchment Resilience, which was really an engineering focused group to look at technical solutions, and that was chaired by an engineer from the Drainage Board. Communications and engagement, very important. People become nervous if they don't hear anything. And of course, it's also extremely important when you're trying to establish what to do next, to be listening twice as much as you're transmitting. And that was chaired by the Environment Agency comms teams. And the funding and benefit was chaired by David Hickman from the Lead Local Flood Authority, and David also co-chairs the Strategic Partnership Group along with Norman Robinson from the Environment Agency, and David's on the panel and will be available for questions later today, I'm sure. 4 key themes were rapidly distilled: how to get the river operating more effectively, and so the flows sorted out, how to give the communities some form of resilience should it come to that again, and also just give them some assurance that they've got some form of local protection. Sorting out the banks that had taken quite a pasting during the flood event, and also from burrowing animals, shall we say, over the years has shown up as real stresses in the integrity of the banks during this event. And again, where do we store water? Can we make space for water in the system? And can we introduce some natural flood management to try and take the peaks off any similar event in the future? So those were the 4 key themes. Now, if you wish to look at all the criteria that were looked at under each one of these, if you go to the East Lindsey District Council website, it was placed on there so it would be publicly available. Nothing happens if you don't have money. The Drainage Board came up with £250,000, the Environment Agency 625,000, the County Council 150, RFCC found 60,000, and ELDC, again, the Local District Council, found another 50. And that was really to try and get the conveyance going on the river. But the agency were also, the Environment Agency, were extremely successful in this case of being able to attract £4 million from the government flood recovery funds that came following this rainfall event, because it affected quite large swathes of the country. Well, the agency partners pressed on with slowing the flow in the upper regions and speaking to the landowners about that, and getting staff in and experts to try and work out how to do that. They also got stuck in about the fixing the toes to the banks that had been scoured, and doing sheet piling on elements of the bypass channel that I mentioned that it was suffering from weak banks. And the board undertook to improve the flows and capacity and lead the desilting operation and some bank strengthening works through a public sector cooperation agreement. The works that the PSCA covered, the public sector cooperation agreement covered, were in the region of about £3.5 million. Right, if you look at the diagram, you'll see at the top, very similar to what you've heard in the previous presentations, you'll see what we were faced with. There was excessive weed growth, there was a lot of silt in the watercourse. This is an artificial channel, it's been engineered, it needs to be maintained. The first step was to take, very simply, the readout so that the survey could be undertaken by the agency through a contractor. And then the aim was to achieve the bottom picture there, and that's to lower the silt levels to about 0.8 metres and to achieve an all-year round depth of water of 1.5 metres, as this discourages weed growth and helps make it more sustainable, and it gives you a better quality of water, and it allows you to actually control the river more effectively. Here is the state of the river on the main channel, and you can see why we were keen to do some maintenance work on this. So all of this, apart from the reed fringes, had to be removed to enable the further work to be carried out. 200 modelling runs were undertaken, looking at all sorts of different things, the bridges that span the watercourse to see the impact that they had, but an awful lot of them were undertaken to try and give the appropriate level of proof to meet the grant and aid criteria and the Environment Agency processes and procedures. Please don't mix up these processes and procedures with the willingness of the local teams and the regional teams, engineers and operational staff to actually make a difference and do something here. But they exist, and they're quite controlling, and our ability and our flexibility to get on with what we know has to be done. So it is rather frustrating at times with people who maintain their channels every year to have to prove that removing weed and silt actually increases the flows and the control of a system. Here we have the map again of the main watercourse coming down here. That's the main Steeping River, remember, going in and out round here, and the relief channel which flows round the town to the north. We chose to go down the route of working with a Dutch company called Royal Smalls, who use state-of-the-art technology to desilt the watercourse, and I'll come on to that in a second. But just to point out here that the lengths in purple were moved to lagoon here, the silt that came out, and the green and the red, the same thing. The green is the final part of the desilting operation, and again, it was targeted desilting. It's not every part of the river. Up from our pumping station at Thorpe Culvert, there was little or no silt that was required to be removed. So this is using government funds to good effect. This is the dredger. It doesn't look quite like the QE2, but it is actually very technologically advanced. It's controlled by GPS and satellite. It can work to very, very tight margins. Our engineer was on here, again, all during the COVID period, suitably distanced, to make sure that what was happening was indeed correct, that we were abiding by the correct environmental regulations, etc. The front here is where there's a boom that moves, as a cutter that cuts the silt and moves very slowly indeed. And this is to enable any aquatic life in the river to move on before it actually gets to it. And then the silt in suspension is passed through this pipe. And you'll see just at the toe of the bank here as it runs along, it can go up to 3 kilometres from the actual lagoon where the water is, or where the silt is stored. Here's one of the lagoons. This was the one that was shown to you in purple. This was constructed by the board's DLO staff using bulldozers and again GPS, that's why it's so straight. What happens is the silt would come into here, having been piped down through this pipe, dropped in here, and it would meander around, and as the water ran round slowly, it would drop the solids until you get down to this aspect here where you can see, well, you can't really see, but there's a change, and the water that comes out of the control structure here is clear and free of silt. It's a bit of a Heath Robinson structure, I must say, when I saw it, but we did get it licensed properly through the Environment Agency, and it's something that Royal Smalls have been using everywhere else to good effect, and they used it here to good effect. And the water that's coming out, goodness sake, the water that's coming out was tested several times a day to ensure that we were meeting the requirements of our licence. Here we have the bank strengthening works that we were undertaking. There'd been a lot of badger activity in the Steeping River. The agency managed to attract this additional funding, and it helped restore these banks. And this was the work that was undertaken by the board through a public sector cooperation agreement. It says again across 4 main rivers, but I think the majority of the work was actually down the steeping banks. And it's just as well that that work was done, because after the flooding, it was highly likely that we might just see a similar repeat of what happened on the bypass channel. So what have we learned? Well, as was mentioned actually in the last presentation, that after a catastrophic failure, it's amazing how it's a driver that can unite a partnership. Thankfully, the Lincolnshire partnership has had 1 or 2 positive reasons to be talking to each other through the framework that exists, but this really drove us together to try and overcome and make a difference for the communities. Relationships were at times challenged, but the cohesion soon develops and the trust rapidly grows. And it proved without any doubt that significant beneficial schemes can be delivered, and that proactive maintenance is without doubt cheaper than a fix and fail approach. I think we've also proven a plethora of other basic maintenance techniques that can really make a difference. To name just a few of the things that we've been learning as we went through this system, but I think from what we've heard today have also been learned in many other locations. It would be really good, will we be allowed to apply what we've learned? It'd be really good if we didn't have to undertake 200 modelling runs to prove that taking weed and silt out of a river that's largely flat and artificial helps the flows. Again, this is not the people we were working with. These are not our colleagues and folks we work with day to day that I'm pointing this out at. It's very much aimed directly at the directors of the agency and DEFRA, who really need to start listening to what we're actually saying. So where are we going? Where are we going next, and how are we going to do it? On the left, you've got a picture of the River Idle, and on the right, you've got a picture of the River Devon. We've tried to get together. The NFU are working with us as they did, and with the steeping to try and generate a partnership approach to overcoming these sorts of situations. But let's hope we don't have to start from first principles. Let's hope we can export some of what we've achieved on the steeping catchment to this area and just crack on somewhat 70% down the line instead of starting from grassroots. We really do appeal to those in the higher authority to take time to truly understand what goes on in the areas of special drainage need. And as you've heard today as well, what happens there also affects what happens in the upper catchments. And I wish that they would have the courage to take the appropriate steps to make the difference and to truly listen. We're talking about decommissioning earlier. How many times, having been involved in the pilot decommissioning up in the Isle of Axholme, nothing seems to have changed in the last 2 or 3 years since that transfer of that watercourse occurred. So let's stop talking, let's start listening, and let's start doing. Otherwise, when we get to making key decisions on climate change, they're going to be starting for a false premise in these areas of special drainage need. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That's great. That is the final of our case studies and presenters. We're now going to have a very short break, couple of minutes if you can, to grab a drink or a toilet break, and then Judical Hammond will be taking over the chair for the Q&A session. So we're going to move to that as soon as we can. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gents. We're going to restart in 1 minute, so grab your tea. Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Judy Hammond. I am the Director of Policy and Advice at the Country Land and Business Association. We represent 28,000 landowners and land managers in England and Wales, and it's my pleasure to be chairing the panel discussion this morning. To frame the Q&A session, I'd like to start with some common themes that I've heard from the case studies and the discussions earlier today. So helpfully, everybody welcomes the investment in new defences, but there is a very loud and clear call for more expenditure on maintenance and preventative maintenance of that. We'll have, I'm sure, further discussion on what the ELM scheme can do and what its limits are. Daniel's and indeed Ian's and Andrew's presentation have made it clear that there are solutions, that those solutions very frequently involve collaboration, but where that collaboration does happen, then solutions work. And I'm also very interested in the issue of trade-off between habitats and environment in flooding management and how these are assessed. So I'm sure that there will be questions, and I have already spotted one in the chat during the break on this. The final point that really resonated was we've underestimated, at least in the past, the long-lasting psychological costs of flooding, and what do we do about that? So I think that these are really big issues that I'm hoping we'll explore during the Q&A this morning. A number of these themes mirror what we at the CLA heard from our members as we were gathering views in preparation for our water strategy. Now, this document encapsulates the CLA's vision for water to 2030. It was published last week. It takes a comprehensive look at the whole water environment and the role which farmers and land managers play in protecting water quality, as well as increasing resilience, both to flood and to drought. And as Robert said in his introduction, the Climate Change Committee made clear in their latest assessment of UK climate risk that we're seeing the impact of climate change already. They're devastating for farmers and for communities, and there is a significant gap between the level of risk we face and the level of adaptation and action that is underway. The CLA Water Strategy is available on our website, and it looks at water through the prism of natural capital. And while the document is split into 3 sections, which are drought and water availability, a thriving water environment, and flood resilience, in practice, these areas, as I think we've heard already this morning, are all inextricably linked. Water underpins human lives, it underpins ecosystems, and it underpins economies. So by taking a natural capital approach to water management, we are looking for solutions that can maximise all 3 aspects and help meet climate change targets and improve resilience overall. Now, focusing specifically on flood resilience, we've set out in our strategy our views on respective responsibilities, on the policy mechanisms that should be put in place, and on the investment needed to make this happen. And my colleague Nick Stanford, who is on today's panel, will no doubt go into that later on. Which brings me to the panel. We've heard about the problems in the case studies. Let's turn to possible solutions, and I'm particularly interested in those that have co-benefits for water availability, water quality, climate change and biodiversity. So if you have questions for our panelists, please keep them going, and we'll ask them as we go along. Let me introduce the panelists. So we've got Richard from the NFU, who is the chair of their Environment Forum. Welcome, Richard. We've got Robert, who needs no introduction. We've got Mark Garrett, who is the Deputy Director, Business Implementation and Skills at the Environment Agency. We've got Will Harrington from the Water and Flood Integration Team in DEFRA. We've got David Hickman, who is the Head of Environment at Lincolnshire County Council. Welcome, David. And we've got Nick Sanford, who is the Interim Regional Director in the East region at the CLA. So, gentlemen, many thanks for joining us this morning. And I'd like to get us started with a question for our non-government panelists, that is Robert, Richard and Nick. And what I'd like to ask you is, what do you see as the most promising solutions to the key issues raised by the case studies? And if I can please make a plea right now, given that we're slightly late on schedule, that all speakers keep their responses concise. That will help us and help me take as many questions from the floor as we possibly can go through. And I won't be asking everybody in turn for their views, but by all means, if you think that you've got something to contribute and I'm not coming to you, wave your hand and I will pick that up. So starting with Robert, if I may, what do you think are the most promising solution?
I think that partnership working is clearly the way forward, and we've seen that from a number of the case studies where actually we worked in partnership. That's really made the difference. But it's delivery. I would say, Judical, is about having the most appropriate partner delivering that through public sector cooperation agreements. I think are really important, but I think it is really important that efficiency of delivery is about making sure that it's true partnership, not just a partnership of funding.
Thank you very much, Robert. Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Judah Seal. I think the challenge that's been there for quite a number of years now has been catchment balance, and Andrew's presentation very clearly demonstrated that. So the challenge now is about getting that catchment balance right, and that's going to be a combination of things, as has been well described. And what's also been very clear to me on everything that I've heard so far is the depth of knowledge that there is out there. So that's echoing very much what Robert said. There's a huge amount of knowledge, local knowledge there. Combine that together with the wider catchment view. I'll come on to Elms a bit later. I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to do that.
You certainly will.
That would be the starting point.
Thank you very much, Richard. Nick.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the clear rights and responsibilities on flood defence is absolutely key. A flexible approach, for land managers to undertake some work with other authorities. I think the other thing that's come out very clearly is that the demaining of rivers needs to progress as quickly as possible, because it seems that the IDBs have a far more active and proactive way of dealing with that, and I think their relationships with farmers and landowners is much more positive than, sadly, with the EA at the moment. And it's clear that obviously we've got to maintain existing flood structures and existing river systems, which are, as they said, engineered solutions, before we spend a lot of money on perhaps new defence works, perhaps get the old stuff working properly and how it's designed to, before we start spending a lot more money on expensive new works. And generally, overall, looking at the whole catchment, as it's been seen, I mean, excellent case studies, and it's clear that actually you've got to look at the whole thing from the Highland Springs to the where it disgorges into the sea, because otherwise there's going to be problems. But clearly, where we got solutions that were designed and engineered years ago, they have to be maintained and looked after. So demaining catchment, overview of catchments altogether, and working together with partnerships, and actually giving more responsibilities back to landowners where they can to maintain their own flood defences.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to turn to government panelists now. So Will, Mark and David. So I guess one of the questions that came up in the previous session was, how do we persuade Environment Agency, DEFRA, and I guess the Treasury not to, in the words of one of the presenters, count houses? How do we do that? I'll start with Mark.
Thanks, Judy Kale. I think what we heard today around catchment partnership, catchment working, where we explore how we make the resource that we've got go as far as we possibly can. Is a great starting point in terms of maximising investments across all parties, understanding how the catchment works, and the ability to deliver not just only flood risk management benefits, but wider economic and social benefits at the same time. We know that investment in flood risk work does generate far wider benefits, and these are being picked up by government. I think Georgina mentioned incorporating some of those aspects into the funding assessments. Mental health impacts was mentioned, and I think the trick here is about sort of making sure that we get all the investment pulling together. And I think the best way we get the investment pulling together is by demonstrating how it pulls together to deliver integrated water management and delivering far-reaching benefits at a catchment scale.
Thank you. Will, what is DEFRA's view on how we make sure that the money is spent in a way that is not necessarily obviously the best, but actually in the long run proves to be the most effective?
I think, thank you, Chair. I think I'd say I'd agree with Mark and what he says. I think I would add that we are looking beyond just homes and houses and other more effective ways. We're looking at more in the upper catchments and how that has a benefit, and how that then has a greater resilience further through the catchments. I think government is always, and everyone's going to have a different view about this, but is always going to prioritise life and property first, and it's going to look to that. But it's how we deliver it, and it's how we deliver it in the most effective way. And it may not just, it doesn't just have to be concrete and steel. There are alternatives, and there are programmes looking at driving that forward.
You've just given me a beautiful cue, Will, to talk about ELM. So I guess the question on ELM is, how can the programme help deal with some of the issues that we've been discussing this morning without using up an awful lot of the money? Because I think the problem that I certainly am noticing with ELM is a lot of people are expecting it to do a lot of things, and yet there is a restricted pot. So where do we start? I'm going to ask Richard for his view on that.
You're bang on with that concern. The current budget that's going into agriculture, or has been going through the CAP, is 3.2 billion. The flooding, whilst aspects of natural flood management and floodwater storage comfortably could fit well with ELMS, this is going to need extra funding. There's no doubt about it. It needs to come from, it can be combined within ELMS, but it's going to need supplementary quantities of money, clearly. And this is going to be addressed at all levels in the catchment. There's obviously a clear role in slowing the flow in the uplands, but we also need to make sure, as has been so well demonstrated today so far, that flow gets through those constricted points further downstream as well. And the biggest challenge that we've got facing us is climate change. It's been mentioned once today about, I think possibly in the chat, regarding sea level rises. This is about future proofing. This is potentially going to be considerably bigger than the COVID challenge that we've had. And as we've seen, when we really have a difficult situation, the funds can be found and can be directed. And I would suggest we very much have got the same challenge here when it comes to managing water.
Thank you very much, Richard. Will, what is DEFRA's view of where and how new government policies, and particularly ELM, can work and can help on flood management?
So ELM is part of the solution, and as Richard mentions, natural flood management and water storage is currently part of it, but it also goes further. So it also includes soil management, which was a theme earlier on in the discussion and the presentations, and how we encourage better management of soil to prevent it going into rivers and water bodies. I think the government recognises that ELM is not the sole answer here, and has made commitments to increase natural flood management schemes and measures across the board. It does feature as part of the grant and aid, so flood defence capital works already. So it's not just ELM that's going to be delivering this.
Okay, and can I follow up with a question for you, Will, in terms of the barriers to demaining low flood risk reaches of rivers, because we're hearing quite a lot about that and what can be done. Are there, and I'm going to ask Mark the same question, are there things that can be done more quickly in terms of cutting paperwork? And if not, and if we are looking at legislation, what is the kind of timetable that we're looking at?
If I start and then maybe hand over to Mark, it is, as people have said earlier, it is very challenging. It can be quite expensive as well. In some areas, there's been reluctance. There's a keenness for it to be to internal drainage boards, but we know that they don't cover all areas, and we're waiting on the Environment Bill to help move that forward. If we were looking at further legislative change, it then comes down to the challenge of finding parliamentary time against a quite wide-ranging government list of legislation that it wishes to drive forward and priorities. Many won't be surprised that over the last year or so, or couple of years now, a lot of time has been taken up by Brexit and COVID. So there's potentially a backlog now of legislation we would be battling against as well. I don't know if Mark wishes to add anything.
Oh, thanks, Will. I mean, yes, people have said it, that it is difficult and complex. We did the demaining pilots where we did demain about 64 kilometres of watercourse, and through those demaining pilots we did learn some really valuable lessons around some of the complexities and challenges. And myself, I've been on the front line of it because I was a area flood risk manager in Greater Manchester, Merseyside and Cheshire, where this played out. One thing I would say is early engagement is absolutely critical in terms of getting the right partners around the table at the right time. In terms of it's been raised here, I think the message has been received. I think whilst there might be aspects that need to be looked at in a legislative way, I think we're happy to look at, what can be simplified and streamlined outside of that. I think it's important that we do that and not lose the lessons that have been learnt through the demaining pilots. So that will be a focus for us moving forward. But yeah, I've been on the front end of it myself in terms of how difficult and challenging it is. And we do need to bring that operational experience to bear in terms of improving things moving forward.
Mark, if I may, so you said that you are looking at engagement, which is great. Several people have made points about listening to local experience, which is vital. There was points about communications in one of the presentations we've seen. What does it mean in practice? What is the Environment Agency planning on doing differently?
I think we're absolutely committed, Chair, to the catchment approach. It's writ large through our new national FCRM strategy, the importance of collaboration, the need to tackle flood risk management, water level management collaboratively is a must if we're going to tackle the climate emergency, respond to climate change. Engagement is a massive part of that, and if there are areas in the country where it's just not working, let us know, but we are absolutely committed to doing it. Some of our teams are set up specifically to engage in an outward facing way. We have our partnerships and strategic overview teams. It can be resource intensive. We can't always engage in everyone all of the time, so the bringing together of partnerships in a way that was described in the case studies is incredibly valuable in terms of getting the right people around the table. But I would emphasize again the importance of early engagement, from a professional point of view, personal point of view and operational point of view. The earlier we can engage to understand the risk, the evidence, the options, the interventions, and where the opportunities lie to join up and maximise what we can achieve, you know, certainly the better position we will be in, and we remain committed to working in that way.
Thank you. I think you might have opened the floodgates in terms of people giving you examples of where things could be improved, but we'll see the state of the chat in about 30 seconds. Thank you, Mark. I have a question actually probably for you and for David, and it's about the greater use of PCSAs. Do you think that they're used enough? Can they be promoted? Can the use be increased? Can there be a better join up between what is being done on surface water and river conveyance? David, what do you think?
Well, pleasingly, I remember to unmute myself just before I said that, so that's one embarrassment avoided. Yes, I think they can be. I think they can be used more extensively. I think they can be promoted more. I think there are also alternatives. We certainly have experience of using a simpler sort of memorandum of understanding that we use with our with the internal drainage boards within our area around delegated powers, where we delegate a number of our powers as lead local flood authority to the internal drainage boards, because they're best placed to deliver those particular powers and they have the resource and the expertise. So I think there's a mixed economy that one can apply. I think one of the things that's clearly come through some of the responses we've had so far, and also the chat throughout the meeting, is the need to use as wide a range of approaches as possible in order to overcome some of those potential conflicts between policy areas. I think one of the things that does keep coming up is the need for a stronger balance, or at least a perceived need for a stronger balance between, say, environmental considerations on watercourses, conveyance considerations, engineering considerations. And I think the more we can use a wider range of mechanisms for joint working, the better we can address some of those that balance.
Thank you, Mark. Any views on that?
Sorry, GDK, my connection cut out.
So sorry, the question was the greater use of PSCAs potentially in terms of looking at particularly how it can be promoted or increased, and whether it is a mechanism for linking the management of surface water and conveyance.
Thanks, GDK, for that. Technology hopefully will hold up. Yeah, I mean, public sector corporations agreements is something we've led on over the last few years. People might remember Ian Russell in my team, who retired a couple of years ago, sort of pioneered that. And I think we have something like 49 in place, and they do help to streamline procurement. It does help us to have that kind of collaborative, joined up way of working where we can use them to get risk management authorities to undertake work on each other's behalf. And I know that some PSCAs now have incorporated incident response into their agreement, which I think is fantastic. That was some of the learning back from the 1920 floods. There's probably more that we can look at, but I don't think they're the complete answer. I think it's another option that we've got, which we should utilise as far as possible. But I think, as ever, we're looking at a range of things that we need to use pragmatically, flexibly, depending on what the local circumstances and needs are.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is there's certainly an option, but they're part of a mixed economy of things, and there might be things that work better and are even less resource intensive or paperwork intensive. That's really good. Can I get back to Richard on soils management, and to Nick on dealing with excess water? So Richard, I'm sure that you spotted in the chat that quite a few questions were about silt. Silt used to be soil. So what is your and the NFU's view of opportunities for making sure that soil stays where it's supposed to be, doesn't go into the rivers, and how is it how does that work with the rest of what is happening in terms of agricultural policy? And Nick, I'll come to you in a minute to ask what you think are the possibilities for dealing with excess water, and for that I'm thinking in particular opportunities for reservoirs, because I think Daniel in his presentation mentioned one. Is there more, and what do we need in order to get more built? So Richard, on soils, what are your views?
Yeah, well, obviously soil is a farmer's most important asset. Keeping hold of that soil is critical. And we've seen a lot of education and learning going on in farming, things like cover cropping and less soil disturbance in order to address that. The whole management of water, how it's going to fit in with elms, the resilience to drought and flooding, soil management is obviously a key aspect of that. Building organic matter, for example, is important. We've got certain things also going on elsewhere in government which could challenge that when it comes to farming rules for water. So we've got to be very mindful of the integrated approach that we have and the balance that we need to take. A lot of it's set out. I'll make no apologies in the NFU's integrated water management strategy. So that's certainly worth looking at if you haven't looked at. When it comes to, there's a certain aspect of the movement of sediment in rivers which has a natural element anyway, but I definitely appreciate that there's a huge amount of work still that needs to be done within agriculture. It's one of the challenges that we face, full stop. Unfortunately, as a population, we require farmers to farm land and to produce food. So we're on a journey to ever improve that position.
Thank you very much. Nick, reservoirs, and there was a question, I think, also from John Illingworth in the chat about drought and the need to better convey water to places which need it, which might also be an interesting angle to look at. What do we do with excess water? Nick.
Thank you very much. Not to be outdone by Richard, there's the CLA Water Strategy document as well, which is very similar, so that we all work together. That covers actually that does cover a range of these issues. I think the dealing with the whole issue of flooding, but also of water requirements for summer is a major problem. We spend half the year trying to get rid of water and the rest of the year wondering why we haven't got enough water. So we need to rethink that. And I think one of the problems is that some of the historic agreements, the washland agreements that cover thousands of acres, especially in the east of England, that were set up when flood risk was going to be once every 50 years. And these have been used time and time again in the last 10 or 15 years. And many of our members have lost thousands of acres of wheat and other crops across the land because of flooding. And obviously they feel hard done by, because while the washlands are being used, that they feel that the rivers aren't being maintained to get the water away. So it's a bit of a one-sided deal. But there does seem to be an opportunity with Elm and looking at this thing to think, well, we need to provide winter flood storage, we need to provide water that can be available for summer, and also we need to provide environmental benefits. So perhaps by rethinking all these washlands agreements and perhaps dedicating smaller areas of land that are there as long-term reservoirs, this would enable the water to be stored in, or help prevent flood. It would enable water to be stored for the summer, and also those areas, wetlands, marshlands, etc., and the reservoir around the reservoir area, of course, would have huge environmental benefits, which might mean that actually you could then even more justify perhaps keeping the main rivers clean, because you've got your biodiversity resources in these areas. So I think there's a real opportunity for having a lot of good delivery of a lot of good public goods, flood prevention, summer water and environmental, by actually having new reservoir areas and get rid of perhaps or rethink some of the washland agreements. The other idea that's coming up, and I think I know it's being worked on at the moment by one of the IDBs in Lincolnshire with local landowners, is looking at 10-year license agreements where there's the IDB agree they're going to have certain swales, certain areas that can be flooded, and these are set on it. So it's a license agreement. So the landowner's not giving away his property rights or long leases like the washland agreements, but they have a 10-year thing. Then the water can be stored there or used, and this can help stop flooding. But it's also reviewed every 10 years, which is sort of manageable rather than committing ourselves, because clearly the agreements that were drawn up in the 70s and 80s are just not appropriate now with the change in climate and everything else. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, and as one of the speakers said, I mean, looking at building some quite big new reservoirs in the fens in the wash area. So let's use ELMS and this chance to rethink altogether how we deal with these and use the water to the best advantage, as well as stopping flooding.
Thank you very much. And if I may, keeping on to this link between too little water and too much, there is a question in the chat from Stephen Watkins about the link, or rather the absence of link, particularly in the Environment Agency, between flood and abstraction. So it sounds like there are potential solutions for the whole water environment if we use joined up thinking, but it seems difficult, and it seems that the work is being done in silos. Mark, would you like to comment on that? And then I'll ask Will as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I feel unprepared now because I can't wave my FCRM strategy, but there is a great read across between the NFU Integrated Water Strategy and CLA's strategy, and we talk in the flood strategy about climate resilient places, and we say that deliberately rather than talk about the word flood, because it is about too much, too little, how we manage that in a more joined up and integrated way, and in a place-based way. And that's the culture that we're fostering within the Environment Agency. Judy Kale, we are working collaboratively across departments. We've working collaboratively around flood risk management plans, river basin management plans, to make sure that planning aligns and is joined up, to make sure the ambition is joined up and aligned. And of course, our operational areas, that's where all delivery does become aligned in a place-based way, as a sort of operating model. So the join up is definitely there. The ambition is there. Is there more to do? Probably, and we'll continue to improve that join up as much as we possibly can. But certainly, from my experience, that join up is absolutely happening, and it needs to, because in place-based delivery and in terms of serving the catchment, that's exactly what needs to happen.
So, Mark, staying with you, if that's all right. So you've talked about a number of things that EA was looking at in terms of insurance provisions where you decide to withdraw maintenance. What is the kind of timetable that we're looking at for that? And to what extent do you think that the Environment Agency is going to make a case together with DEFRA for further funding for maintenance, given what we've heard today about the multiple benefits that this might create in the context of the next spending review?
Thanks, Chair. Just wrestling with my mute button. So yeah, in terms of the spending review, absolutely, we are absolutely committed to working with DEFRA colleagues on a multi-year settlement for maintenance. I think that creates certainty around what we can plan. I think it also creates the ability to work more in partnership. I don't know if it's just me, Chair, but I'm hearing loads of feedback, but I'll carry on. So the decision to lead work on a multi-year settlement is definitely there. That's what we would like to do. I think the recent ABI report done with JBA shows some of the benefits of maintenance. That's worth looking at. In terms of our maintenance program, we published that. I think we're just about to publish our next maintenance program. But as ever, there is only so much money, as Caroline was saying, and I think you know, going back to the case studies, every single case study is pointed to the catchment, but catchment and partnership working as a way of making sure that with all the investment that we do have across us all, between us all, that we work together to ensure that delivers as much as it possibly can. Where there may be decisions to stop maintenance, we should definitely do that in collaboration and early engagement with partners, landowners, to make sure there are no surprises, and definitely committed to doing that. But certainly looking at that work programme and working with partners to align work programme investment to make sure that investment can go as far as it possibly can is absolutely key. And I think by doing that, you start to identify wider ranging benefits, which may help to draw in additional investment, which is what is needed based on those wider benefits, whether that's growth fund money or whatever it might be. But it's also important we look at what we need to invest in terms of not just looking at what has happened, but also what needs to happen in a changing climate.
Thank you. Will, I'm going to come to you next with the same question. What is DEFRA planning on doing to make the case to Treasury for more management? We've also had a couple of questions in the chat about carbon reduction. Should we change the appraisal system in pumped catchment to allow us to invest to rationalise low-level systems? We are often moving the same water twice. And this is heavily linked to main river channel performance, so a question on climate change. And there is also a question on habitats and how do we best assess the trade-off between habitats and the need to keep the rivers flowing.
Thank you, Chair. I lost you a bit in the middle, so I'll do my best, and then if there's anything I miss, please let me know. I think firstly on engagement with Treasury and the spending review, work is already underway on that, and we're pulling together our sort of first go of list of asks and what we're going to be asking for on that work, and that will go on probably through the summer into the autumn, and ministers will be making the case for the sort of the best budget they can go for. It's going to be challenging, as we've heard. We all know the situation, but Treasury are supportive and aware of the benefits from maintenance. But it is going to be challenging, as I say, so that work is underway. On carbon reduction and net zero, we've got a government target that we're all working towards and meeting. We're aware of some of the desire, especially amongst internal drainage boards, to look at their pumping regimes and their maintenance and to move to a more green area. So we're looking at that as well. But it's early days at the moment, I think I would say. And on, sorry, what was the question around biodiversity?
The question is how do we cope with apparent trade-offs, at any rate, between habitats and the need to maintain rivers and do the kind of work that Andrew and the other Andrew have actually described in terms of moving some of the stuff that has accreted to the riverbanks.
So I recognise that it is incredibly challenging that we're trying to manage the water and manage the flood risk and drought risk, and at the same time we need to look after the biodiversity and the environment. I don't know necessarily that I have the right answer. I think it's just a continuation of the partnership and collaboration working, and that we just try and find the best solutions for the individual areas, because it will always vary.
Okay, I think there is an interesting comment which I'll leave you with in the chat from James Copeland about if areas are underwater, there's no habitats, there's no food for local wildlife, which is something that was raised in the chat before. And it's really important to make sure that we keep in mind that if things go wrong, frankly, we're wiping off several natural capital benefits and not just the one. So it may be worth the trade-off, I think, is what I will leave you with. And another comment just now on conveyance and habitats, and maybe the ambition that all rivers should reach good environmental condition should be looked at again in respect of heavily modified and artificially engineered rivers. That's certainly a point that came across to me in the presentations that we've seen, the extent to which most of these systems are heavily engineered, and that is a point well worth considering. David, is there anything that you want to add on this point of conveyance and habitats from the local authority perspective? And after that, I think I'll wrap up this discussion. You're on mute, David.
Okay, thank you, Judy Kale. I think I would really echo previous comments about the need to really drive the partnership agenda in this area. I think certainly in low-lying coastal areas, we find a lot of locations which conform to the kind of structure of channel that Andrew McLaughlin was talking about, where you have a lengthy low-lying section of channel where conveyance is key. But I also think that we need to be thinking not just in terms of conveyance, but in terms of bridging that gap between when we have too much water and too little water. So I think while we have major strategic consideration of water retention and use of water as a resource that Daniel referred to, I think there's also a lot of scope within that framework, looking at a more localized approach, on-farm storage, again in line with perhaps a more flexible, more localized approach, reviewed on a regular basis. Again, you know, I think we really need to be starting to talk in terms of resilience of areas, resilience of place, and to see flood risk, environmental benefit, water resource management as all parts of a broader contribution to the resilience of place, resilience of community, as we adapt and as we work with the impacts of climate change over the next 10, 40, 100 years.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to all panelists for their insights and to participants for their many questions. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to deal with all of them in detail. We've come to the end of the allotted time for the panel. And before I hand back to Robert for his final remarks, let me try and summarise the key takeaway points from the discussion. So, there is a clear appetite for more clarity of roles and responsibilities, and with responsibility being closer to local communities and local level decision making, and the great examples of partnerships, and when partnerships do work and do deliver. In order for more of these to happen, however, there is a clear need to cut red tape, and the need for a more streamlined process for demaining couldn't be clearer. And I'm sure that this is on the radar for people at the Environment Agency and in DEFRA, but I think we do need to see action on this because the frustration is long-standing, and we can't necessarily wait, particularly with the risks attendant to climate change. Better allocation of money, but also more money, I think, is another theme that came through very strongly. ELM will help, but it won't be enough. And I think it was Richard who said that further funds are needed, and it looks, particularly from the recent way that the government has been behaving, like funds can be found if there is enough will. And as I mentioned before, the spending review is coming. So that's an excellent opportunity for DEFRA and the EEA to make the case for more maintenance, and certainly we in the CLA have called for an additional 75 million a year for preventative maintenance, given that the benefits to cost ratio is a very healthy 7 to 1. And I think this was the National Audit Office who said that. And they would know, I thought, and I'm sure other organisations would support that as well. So perhaps government colleagues can be less reticent about asking for more funds. The Environment Bill will help with creations of IDBs. That's great. What else can we do? And finally, what I would like to point out is we've heard about synergies between objectives of government policy and certainly the interests of farmers on soil management and flood management, which give me cause for optimism. Finally, it's heartening to hear that EA guidance to landowners is being updated. Let's make that happen before the next rainy season hits, please, or before the next catastrophe, in the words of Ian Sturdy. So plenty of opportunities, but a lot of work to do and a lot of big challenges that have to do with structures and with money. Robert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Judith, and thank you to all the panelists and all of the presenters today, because I think we've had a fantastic day. And thank you so much for everybody who's put questions in. And I know there will be many of you who will feel frustrated that your question wasn't asked or that you needed to come back on this. And we are absolutely determined that this is going to be the start of a much wider conversation about this and a much wider national debate about this, because I think there are lots of things we can still do. I don't accept that good maintenance, as we saw in the case studies on the steeping, are contradictory to good water quality and good environment. I know the steeping, it's very close to me at home, and we've seen when that work has been done, the fish have come back in because the fishermen are back on the river. We've seen, with good maintenance, water vole populations increasing. We've seen otters thriving. So I really don't think that this is a debate which is habitat versus conveyance. It's how we do that and making sure that we really are working smarter with modern techniques to make sure that we can really do that. I think the other comments about water resources, water management, I think climate change is really going to be the key. When I talk to my colleagues in Southern Europe, they cannot understand why we're pumping so much water away when the east of England in particular, and I know you'll know this, Richard and Nick, the east of England is one of the driest parts of Northern Europe. And it really is so important that we start to integrate that. I'm really pleased to hear from Will and Mark about strategies, but it's the funding streams that we need to make sure that also are more integrated, because at the moment they are very much in silos. And I think that Water Resources East has been a great way forward. We need to see that work now being delivered across the place. So those are my comments on there. But please, to everybody, don't think this is the end of the conversation. We'll take the comments in the chat, but we need to make sure that this is a debate we all take forward. And I hope that we'll be able to actually meet in person very shortly in the future. Thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you all. It's just kicking in here. Our attendees are just dropping off. We're at about 29 attendees, just people signing out.
Yeah, so we were actually slightly ahead of a time in the end.